plant clinics are sponsored by Virginia's two land-grant universities, Virginia Tech and Virginia State University. Our plant clinics are staffed by Master Gardeners from the Fairfax County Master Gardeners and the Green Spring Master Gardener units. Today, we are a group of Fairfax County Master Gardeners. We are going to be sharing with you some science-based horticultural information about gardening on two topics. My name is Ann Mason, and I'm from Fairfax County Master Gardeners. Today, I'm joined by gardeners Laura and Kathleen, who will be talking about some very important topics related to fall cleanups, related to peonies, roses. So now I'm going to introduce Laura, who will talk about winterizing peonies.
Okay, thank you, Ann. Welcome, everyone. Yes, we're going to be talking about how to winterize peonies. So, let's go ahead. Okay, so winter is good for peonies. They need it. They require about 30 to 40 days of cold that's below 40 degrees. That's what they have to have in order to grow and bloom the next year. So they develop their buds for spring during the winter months. Fall is the best time to plant new peonies or divide and transplant any that are too crowded. And fall maintenance is very important. The non-woody herbaceous plants die back in the cold, leaving just the stump. The roots must be protected so they can grow and sprout in the spring. Tree peonies have some hard stems and form a leafless shrub in the winter. So when and how do we cut them back? In the autumn, the peony plant will start to dry up and change to yellowish color. And after the first frost, they wilt. So then at that time, we need to trim all the leaves, ensure your cutting blades are sharp and sterilized, and then trim the stems to about 1 inch above the soil. So be careful not to trim off the buds. Those are found near the soil surface in our next year's growth, and they're fine being exposed to cold and frost. And you may want to put a plant marker there to keep track of where they are so they don't get stepped on in the winter, especially if you get a little snow cover. You don't want to be walking around and step on the peonies. The non-herbaceous plants don't have to be pruned, but you can remove unwanted stems near the base to leave room for new growth. So use care if it's a grafted variety. Make sure you prune the branches above the graft if you need to. And trim the stems at a slant so that ice can't form on the cut and cause rot. You want to make sure that slant is where water isn't going to collect and harden into ice and just sit there on the end. So removing debris. We want to completely remove all the leaves and debris, including the mulch. The debris may contain fungus or bacteria. So we want to destroy the leaves or put them in the trash. It's not recommended to compost them. So removing those contaminants will help to grow healthy plants the next year. The leaves and debris should be removed regularly through the season to discourage powdery mildew and other diseases. So what about mulching? Since peonies need those 40 days of cold over the winter, they usually don't need much mulch. You don't want to get them so covered that they stay warm and don't get that cold air that they need to keep them cold. But you may need to place some mulch or straw around them if you have days that are multiple days below 30 degrees. They don't like to stay that cold for very long. If you do put a little bit of mulch down there, if you get a really cold winter, just keep it away from the crown. And if you don't want to use mulch, you're getting a couple of days of really cold weather, you can just put a temporary cover like a trash can lid or some kind of cover over them to give them some protection and then take it back off. So you can add the mulch in the spring and that'll discourage weeds. So dividing and transplanting. Peonies do not respond well to transplanting and will slowly reestablish in the new location. So dividing and replanting should only be done if they're crowded, maybe every 10 to 15 years. If they're crowded and you want to spread them out, fall is the best time. The swollen red buds are visible. So carefully dig around and under and avoid cutting the roots. Cut the tubers with a sharp knife that's sterilized and flames or alcohol. And make sure each section has 3 to 5 eyes on it. And then replant them 3 to 4 feet apart and no more than 2 inches deep. And those are the references for my information if you want to look up any of those things.
Good. Great, thanks, Laura. Do we have any questions from the audience? you can either type in the chat or you can unmute and ask a question. And while you're in the process of doing that, Laura, if you could talk a little bit about sterilizing your equipment. You mentioned it's important to sterilize as you're trimming your herbaceous peonies. Tell us how you do that.
Great, yeah. Sterilizing your equipment is important pretty regularly when you're working, because you don't want to have, if any plant has something on it, you don't want to transfer it to other plants. So wiping off the blades with alcohol pads or some kind of alcohol to clean them, or just wash them in soap and water and dry them really well. They should be regularly cared for that way. They also mentioned that you could use flame. You can just use heat on them to make sure that anything is so that they're nice and clean before you do any cuts. It just protects the plants. As you're moving around your garden, you don't want to spread things around.
One of the tips that I use in sterilizing my equipment, my little scissors that I use, is I have a small container of isopropyl alcohol, and I simply dip the tips of my scissors into the isopropyl alcohol, leave it there for a little while. I have 2 sets of shears, so I put one in for disinfection while I use the other one, and then replace it so that it gets a good contact. The recommendation from the scientists are that you need to really leave the shears in alcohol for about 5 minutes.
Really?
I found very lengthily, but
yes,
since I've been doing that, I've said, well, gee, I've been doing the right thing all along. But they have found that if you just wipe it off, that you get some of the protection, but you don't get as much sterilization as just dipping and leaving it for a short period of time.
That's good. Thanks.
So now we're going to transition to another favorite plant in the Mid-Atlantic, but a challenging one. And Gardener Kathleen will be talking about roses.
Thank you, Anne. Hello, I'm Kathleen Kurthlois with Fairfax County Master Gardeners, and I have some pointers on caring for your roses in the fall and preparing them for winter. And first, here's a look at some of the most commonly grown types of roses for the garden. Here you can see an example of a hybrid tea on the left, then at the center, a floribunda, and then at the right, a grandiflora. And other types of roses for the garden include climbers, ramblers, tree roses, and miniatures. So fall cleanup, this is the time to begin. September and early October are time to start preparing the rose garden for fall and winter seasons. And preparation starts with a thorough garden cleanup, as Laura mentioned. And this is especially important for roses. For tools, you need garden gloves, a rake, clean, sharp pruning shears, and yard waste bags, such as the large biodegradable paper bags, which I found have the added bonus of standing up on their own and not quite as awkward as some other bags I've used. Clean and clear your rose beds by removing dead plant material, fallen leaves, and old mulch and debris around the roses. And this will also clean up any insects, their eggs, fungal material that may be present, that if left there would overwinter to reproduce in the spring and affect the plant again next year. If you are planning to plant roses this fall, do so before the ground freezes. Water them well to help get them established before it gets cold. When you're choosing roses to plant, check on their hardiness zone to give them the best chance of doing well over the winter in this area. Some challenges you may be finding in the garden now may include powdery mildew. In September, your plants might be showing signs of powdery mildew, which can be seen on trees, shrubs, and perennials also. The fungal condition likes warm, dry days and cool, humid nights, especially when there is a 25 to 30 degree variation in daytime highs and lows. The mildew usually appears on plant foliage as a grayish powdery coating on the upper leaf surfaces. It will feed on the plant and twist and distort the leaves. Eventually, the surface will become more white, and you can help your roses by treating for this condition. You do want to keep your roses as healthy as possible going into winter, and this means keeping an eye out for this kind of condition. So for powdery mildew, a cultural treatment is to remove and discard the affected leaves, remove and prune out affected stems. And some other treatments include using sulfur, neem oil, jojoba, and sesame oils, recommended to prevent the spread of this condition, but they will not necessarily cure the fungal problem. Fungicides are available at garden stores, and with any application like this, thorough coverage is important to control the condition. Clemson University suggests adding 3 tablespoons of horticultural oil to a gallon of water with 3 tablespoons of potassium bicarbonate or baking soda for controlling powdery mildew. So that's their advice for that. And as always, if you use a chemical application, it is very important to read carefully and follow the label directions on each product. Another issue you might have been having through the growing season for your roses is black spot, which is a common problem caused by a fungus. And it's still important to mention it now, even though it occurs earlier in the season, because you do want to try to make sure it's not causing defoliation, which will weaken the plant and make it more susceptible to winter damage. So controlling black spot will help the rose stay healthy and more resilient over the winter. For future reference, in spring, early summer, remove leaves when you see black spots developing, before it really gets started, and that can help limit it. Another issue quickly to look for is Japanese beetles, and I can speak more about that in a little bit. I'll come back to that. So fertilizing roses, it's recommended to stop fertilizing them by the end of September, and some garden resources say no more feeding after July to limit that fresh growth that could be vulnerable when the weather turns cold. Reducing the rose's fertility in the fall can help harden the plants for winter, so to speak. If you are fertilizing now, you may consider organic fertilizers such as aged manure, compost, leaf mold, and several that are formulated specifically for roses. And water well before and after feeding the plants. Some advise a combination of organic and inorganic fertilizers for best results. The organics are more slowly available to the plant and add to fertility over a longer period of time. The inorganics are quicker acting and more concentrated. Generally, roses like a higher percentage of phosphorus, which is that second number on the series of 3 numbers on the container, which also include nitrogen and potassium. You could look for formulations of 5-10-5 or 4-8-4 or 4-12-4 as good maintenance for roses. You could also use formulations where the numbers are equal, such as 8-8-8. After the fall, don't fertilize again until spring, after the danger of severe freeze has passed. So from fall going into winter, getting your roses ready. If it's been dry during the fall season, give them some watering and make sure the roses are watered well leading into the winter. This can help settle the soil and keep the canes and roots in good shape. For mulching, After the old plant material has been removed, you can use mulch such as hardwood, pine, or mushroom compost around the roses. And for zone 7, which is our area, it's recommended to use mulch at a depth of about 5 to 6 inches. And then for added protection, as you can see in this illustration here, you can pile some loose soil at the base of the rose bushes, piling up to about 10 to 12 inches of soil that will drain well. And this is important if the rose is grafted. If the bud union is damaged over winter, the plant can suffer damage and won't grow as well as it ought to. If you don't want to use soil, you could use loose compost or aged sawdust, as long as it drains well. You don't want to use leaves or grass clippings or materials that could remain wet and create rot around the canes, which can promote disease. If you want additional protection, you could place evergreen branches or straw over the mound of soil and mulch, and that gives you a little bit extra depth. Remember, good care for roses in summer and fall can contribute to their resilience in the winter, and a vigorous bush is more able to stand cold than a weak one. So let's talk about pruning. To prune or not to prune, that is the question. And it has kind of a two-part answer. First, the answer is yes when it comes to hybrid teas, floribundas, and grandifloras, which can get a light pruning in the fall. But not too much, because that could stimulate growth, and you don't want that to make the bush more vulnerable. Some pruning in the fall is a good idea to cut the tall canes to around 30 inches high, maybe 35 or 36 inches. This helps stabilize the shrub and helps keep it from being loosened by winter winds or suffering breakage due to snow and ice. You can remove damaged canes now or damaged branches. Now, the exception, part 2, is climbers. They should be pruned in the spring when other roses will also get their more serious pruning. Some tips for pruning, just a few, and factors to keep in mind. Make the cuts slightly above a strong bud that faces the outside of the plant. Pruning to an outward bud will encourage the branch to grow out of the bush and not toward the center of the shrub, where it will maybe intersect with other branches or canes. Make all the cuts clean and smooth by using a sharp, disinfected pair of pruning shears or a knife, as was described before in terms of disinfecting. When you're cutting back a rose cane, make the cut at an angle or slant just above the outward pointing bud to allow the water to run off the cut surface and reduce the chance for rot. Going into winter, roses that you find in this area are generally hardy enough to survive the cold winters in this region. But roses can still be damaged by extreme cold weather, severe winter weather. You may see the effects of damage to the plants in the next season of hot, stressful weather. A weakened rose will have more difficulty fighting off disease and pests and may not reach its full potential. So winterizing protects them for the next season's growth. It will reduce the chances of damage from frost or freezing when severe weather is predicted. And you can help them with additional protection, such as burlap or cloth coverings, tree guards, wraps for the young bushes, extra mulch, plant covers, and so on. Be careful to carefully remove the covering in spring after the danger of severe freeze is over, so you might not damage or affect any tender new shoots that are coming up. You might want to keep some straw or mulch material handy to cover plants in case of a late frost in the late winter or early spring. And another tip, if you plant them in protected locations, it can reduce the need for special winter protection and help keep your plants healthier. Here are a few resources used for this presentation, and I'll just point out a couple of things. The first two are from the University of Missouri, which has, I think, excellent resources for taking care of roses, very detailed and helpful, I think. And then we have a couple of sources from our website, fairfaxgardening.org, which here includes a November garden calendar, which will be useful for a lot of things. And then a little further down, we have a very good article on powdery mildew by our fellow gardener, Pat Dickey, on our website as well. So with that, are there any questions?
Thanks, Kathleen. We wanted to come back to the Japanese beetles. Tell us about that.
Okay, so now is the time to take action and control the grubs of the Japanese beetle, which are now small, and they're in shallow soil, maybe just a couple of inches down. And this is a good time to try to reduce their population before they do come out as more fully formed pests in the spring, early summer. So do this in the fall. Spray for them now so that the spray can reach them in that shallow soil where they exist right now. If you wait longer, they start to descend through the soil down to 6 or 8 inches deep, where you can't reach them so easily. So it's good to catch them early. They'll rest in the ground and come up in the spring. And as they come up through the soil in the spring, they are fat and ready to molt into full beetles. So it's harder, if not impossible, to kill them at that point. They're large and they're more resilient to that. So if you treat with insecticide at that point, you're probably wasting your money. Once they do come out and you find them on your roses, one effective way to control them in an organic way is just to pluck them off by hand and drop them in a container of soapy water where they will drown. And you can reduce their population that way pretty easily. It's a little effort, but it does work.
Thanks, Kathleen. Now, one of the things that connects Laura's talk on peonies and Kathleen's talk on roses is that while the Japanese beetles love roses, there is a psyllid moth that's a parasitic wasp that is attracted to the single bloom peonies. And this parasitic wasp loves to lay their eggs on Japanese beetle larvae. So the connection is, if you're going to plant some roses, also consider to put in some single bloom peonies. Those are the ones that don't have the big, lovely flush of blossoms like the middle purple one in this picture, but is the one that looks more like a rose that has a single layer of petals. And you'll have some natural protection from the wasps that come along. So that's just another tip that we heard from a gardener from Williamsburg, Joe Takanovich, who has gave a class on how you might control these. So it's just another thing to think about, is there's partners in the garden.